you brought up that the Gospels used sources that are much earlier than the
Yeah,
time that they were written.
yeah,
And in your books, you frequently talk about not just Q, but the M and L sources.
yeah.
So, do these sources, Q, M, and L, do they represent independent oral traditions that go back to the historical Jesus, to his time?
Probably, although they themselves were not oral traditions. And so for the readers who don't, or the listeners who don't know what this is all about, you obviously have four gospels in the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Three of them are very, very similar to each other. Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell many of the same stories, usually in the same sequence. This happened and this and this. Even like the stories aren't related. Like, Jesus healed this blind man and then he, healed this paralytic. Like, there's no connection between these stories, but they're told in the same sequence usually. And sometimes they're told in the same words. Like word for word the same. Okay, so somebody's copying somebody here. The only explanation is that somebody's copying somebody. And since the 19th century, there have been overwhelming arguments that are almost certainly right that Mark was used by both Matthew and Luke. Matthew and Luke had some kind of copy of Mark individually in front of them. But Matthew and Luke also have a lot of sayings of Jesus, that are not found in Mark. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, the Lord's Prayer or the Beatitudes, you get versions of these in Matthew and you get versions in Luke, and they didn't get them from Mark because Mark doesn't have them. And there's pretty good reason for thinking that Luke didn't get them from Matthew and Matthew didn't get them from Luke. And if that's the case, then they must have gotten them from somewhere. And so scholars in the 19th century came up with this hypothetical document that's called Q. Q stands for the German word Quelle, Quelle. This was understood to be a source for some of Jesus' sayings. And so Quelle means source in German. So it's the sayings Quelle, or just call it Q. So I think that there's very good evidence for Q, that it did exist at one time. Matthew also has a lot of stuff that's not found in Mark or Luke. So it's not from Q, it's not from Mark. And so scholars have just a long time called that his M material, M for Matthew, Matthew's special source. It might be like a single document, but I doubt it. I bet that it's probably a bunch of documents, probably or oral traditions he's heard. It's possible he just made some of the stuff up. I don't know. But there's like almost nothing to suggest that, in the sense that the stories that you find in what's called M are shaped the same way that these other stories are. And these other stories look like they come from written source. So it looks like M's probably a written source, and the same with L. And so, but again, with it, both M and L is Luke's special source. With both M and L, we don't know what we're talking about. Are we talking about like a single source? Are we talking about lots of written sources, lots of oral sources? Luke starts his Gospels by saying that many people have produced an account of Jesus' life, but that he's now going to present an accurate one, which is an interesting statement to say, if Mark was one of his sources. Because if Mark is one of his sources, he seems to be implying that his predecessors didn't really do a very good job. So he might be kind of dishing Mark here a little bit. But if he had many sources and we only know of two of them, then it would seem likely that L would be multiple sources, written sources. So anyway, all of those have to predate Matthew, Mark, the Q and M and L have to predate Matthew and Luke, and so they're earlier. Q is earlier, so we don't know how early. A lot of scholars date Q to the 50s, but I don't know if it's the 50s. I mean, Matthew and Luke are writing the 80s, so I don't know when it's written, but before that.
Do most scholars believe that the Gospels used not just Q but M and L? Matthew used M and and Luke used L.
Yeah, I think so. The majority opinion, the big debate is not about M and L. Mm-hmm. And the big debate isn't like a big debate, but it's a debate whether Q existed or not. There are scholars who are renewing the idea that Matthew actually copied Mark and that Luke copied both of them. And that's possible. It eliminates a hypothetical source. So on that level, it's a good theory. The problem is it doesn't make sense of a lot of the data. And so it's not the majority opinion at all. The majority of scholars still think there's a Q. Once you've got Q and Mark, you can explain a good bit of Matthew and Luke. But there's all sorts of things, like in Luke, for example, the parable of the Good Samaritan, or the parable of the prodigal son, or the birth story in Luke, or the birth story in Matthew, or there's all this material that is found in one, but not any of the others. And it either came from somewhere, or these guys are just making it up. And it's possible they were making it up, but as I said, the stories are told in a way that are so much like the stories they're getting from written sources that have been based on oral traditions, that almost certainly these are also based on oral traditions. And so whether they come to them in written form or oral form is hard to tell, but they definitely are earlier sources. And that, I think that's there. I don't know. I don't think I know any scholars who believe that Matthew and Luke are just making those ones up. The scholars may exist, but offhand I can't think of any.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during a live stream. Thank you.